good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. My name is Sean. I'm delighted you're joining us for today's ESPC community webinar. Today I'm joined by Samson Chiron, who will cover semantic model optimization for enterprise AI enablement. We love hearing guys had to say, so remember to join conversation about today's webinar and more on X. Our handle is at ESPC underscore community and our hashtag is hashtag ESPC25. Tweet us, tag us, and tell us what you learned. Don't forget to check out our Learning Hub, which updates the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. You can access and view the Learning Hub by visiting our website, sharepointyard.com, and clicking Content tab at the top. Don't let the learning stop here. Continue to keep up and stay ahead by joining us for our next webinar. One Leg Security, building a unified security model across your Microsoft Fabric data estate with Nadim. This webinar will take place Friday, November 21st, 11 a.m. CET. For more information on this webinar, please check out www.sharepointeurope.com/register for webinars. European Microsoft Fabric Community Conference 2026, hashtag FabCon Europe, is on the 28th September to 1st October 2026, Barcelona, Spain. Join Europe's largest Microsoft tech conference focused on Microsoft Fabric, brought to you in partnership with Microsoft by the team behind the ESPC and the European Power Platform Conference. Building on 130 plus expert-led sessions at FabCon Europe 2025, the 2026 edition will help you modernize your data platform. Hear from Microsoft product teams, MVPs, and community leaders through keynotes, deep dive tutorials, and in-depth sessions. Shape the future of data at FabCon Europe 2026. After this webinar, we'll have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you might have into the chat box. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you'll be notified by email when it's available. And now I'm going to pass you over to today's webinar presenter, Samson. Hello, Samson. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Sean. Thanks for the intro, Sean. Pleasure to be here with you all. Give me one moment as I go ahead and pull up my materials. Awesome. And let me know if you can see my screen okay.
Yeah, it's coming up now.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Awesome.
I can see your screen.
Well,
Yeah.
pleasure being here with you all today. And thank you, Sean, for the warm introduction and hosting this as well. So, one of the most common pain points that IT teams, data professionals face just across the industry and across the profession is oftentimes IT teams, data professionals can often get backlogged with a large amount of user requests. You might have differing requests, conflicting requests from stakeholders, for example. Maybe different stakeholders have different visions for reports. They might need you to pull different KPIs, and all of a sudden, this large backlog of requests backlogs your IT teams and can create a bottleneck and make it harder for your IT teams to start managing requests. And you might have a lot of requests that you need to take care of one by one. Fortunately, tools like Copilot can be a great answer to this. Copilot allows users to get the data they need using natural language, as well as help users get insights, develop reports quickly, and extract all the insights they need from the semantic models and their data. However, for tools like Copilot to succeed, we need to make sure we can provide the tools that it needs so that it can get the data it needs and make sure it can deliver clear and actionable insights. And for Copilot to succeed, it all starts with the semantic model. So in today's presentation, I'm going to be talking a little bit about some ways you can optimize your semantic models and some best practices you can follow to make sure that your semantic models are optimized for Copilot and enterprise AI, and that it can deliver clear and actionable insights. But before diving deeper, just want to give a brief introduction about myself. My name is Samson Trong. I'm currently a data and analytics consultant at RSM US LLP. I specialize in data engineering and analytics on the Microsoft Data Platform, so across both Microsoft Fabric, Microsoft Azure, and Power BI. I've been working in Microsoft Fabric since for about 1 to 2 years now from the start of Microsoft Fabric, and I've built scalable data pipelines, warehouses, and Power BI reports for a large amount of organizations. In addition to my job as a consultant, I also has been recognized globally by Microsoft as a Microsoft Fabric community super user. And I also run my own blog, discoveringallthingsanalytics.com, where I share insights about what I'm learning in Fabric and the cool things I'm doing outside of Fabric right now as well. So our agenda for today, First, I want to talk a little bit about challenges with Copilot. What are the common challenges that Copilot faces when users as well as developers are interacting with Copilot? Then we're going to go through a list of best practices for how we can actually enable our semantic models and optimize it for Copilot in AI. Then we're going to go ahead and review some built-in tools that Microsoft Fabric offers for you to optimize your models. And then lastly, we're actually going to do a demo on those tools so we can see those tools in action, how they work, and how you can start leveraging them today. And lastly, going to leave some time for some questions as well as some answers. So first, let's talk a little bit about challenges with Copilot. What are the common challenges Copilot can face? One of the most common challenges Copilot can face is lack of business context. Often, when users are using Copilot, Copilot can really struggle when there's a lack of key organizational knowledge. For example, you might ask Copilot a question about your revenue for the year, perhaps. However, it might not understand what does a year mean. To you or to a user, a year might be pretty clear. We might be thinking of a calendar year, but Copilot might be thinking about fiscal year, for example, where fiscal years can differ widely for different organizations. You might have a 445 or other custom year ends. In addition, Copilot might be also unaware of how KPIs and custom KPIs are calculated. A very common KPI, for example, is cost of goods sold or cost of sales. While this might sound like a pretty standardized KPI, many organizations calculate this differently, and what they factor into a cost of a good might differ from organization to organization. And if Copilot doesn't have this context, Copilot's going to start making assumptions. And once Copilot starts making assumptions and inferences, that's where you start lacking your source of truth, and Copilot might be less performant than you're expecting. And once it doesn't understand your business context and it's not able to infer confidently, that's when Copilot starts returning generic or irrelevant answers, also known as hallucinations, when it doesn't really understand your specific business language and outputs results that you might not be expecting as well. A next common challenge that Copilot faces is going to be the misinterpretation of data. Oftentimes, when you have an unclear model structure, or the intent of your questions or the intent of your data is unclear, Copilot can often return inaccurate results. For example, let's say you have multiple tables within your semantic model, and they all share a field name. For example, I might have multiple fact tables in my semantic model, and each one I have a field called amount. If I'm going to ask Copilot about, hey, what was the amount for this quarter? Copilot's not going to know which amount to grab. It might grab the first one it encounters, which might not be the one we're trying to look for or analyze. So it can really struggle to identify the correct data source and the correct data field, especially when there's multiple fields that are named similarly without a lot of context. Another common thing that Copilot does that might struggle or users might struggle with or might frustrate users is that sometimes they'll also filter by the wrong date. In my example earlier, I said, let's say, what are our sales for the last quarter? It might use a created date for our when the sales were created. It might use a delivered date for when the sales was delivered. But with all those dates in mind, Copilot can often struggle on which date to use if there's no context behind it and no metadata behind it. It can also misalign on aggregations or apply them to the wrong level of granularity. So let's say you want to calculate that sales over the quarter. It might not know how to aggregate the sales. It might just take the total revenue, or sometimes it might even take out the cost for you, trying to give you that total sales, the bigger picture overall. So lacking that business context will make Copilot misalign a lot of the information it's having, and it'll make it start making assumptions and inferences about your data and your model. And those are just some of the common challenges that Copilot runs into. However, these common challenges can really make the Copilot experience for your end users as well as your developers just a really daunting experience and may make it harder to adopt, and it will make it harder for you to use it overall in your day to day. So, what can we do as IT developers and IT professionals and data professionals to really optimize our semantic models? What are these best practices? So, the first best practice I recommend is using the star schema. Star schema is the core of Power BI. Power BI loves interacting with star schemas, and the star schema really helps simplify your model and helps optimize for performance. So when we're using star schemas, we're generally using a fact table in the middle. That fact table in the middle is going to hold all your transactions, and then you'll have your dimensions on the side, which are going to contain your attributes of your transactions. So generally, what an example of a fact table might look like is maybe you'll have a sales table. So every time a sales order is generated, a new line will get recorded to that fact table. And then might connect to a dimension table, such as an item dimension table, where it'll store additional information about the item. And you have all those attributes separated from the actual fact table, making it easy for Copilot to understand the relationships between your tables, your data, and your overall business structure. And structuring this data effectively will help Copilot interpret the data correctly and understand how your model operates. And as you're using that star schema, as you're doing your data modeling, another important concept to keep in mind is to make sure that you're being explicit with your table relationships. You want to define explicit relationships that are logical, and you want to make sure you're using the correct cardinalities. So with star schemas and data modeling best practices, we want to make sure that most of our relationships are either going to be one to many for fact or one or many to one for facts and dimensions. We really want to avoid that many to many relationships and only use those many to manys when necessary. When introducing many to many relationships, you start introducing ambiguity into the model. And with that ambiguity, Copilot can really struggle on how the data truly relates to each other. And will start making inferences. You might get data duplication, for example, or your metrics and KPIs might be inaccurate overall. And as we're defining relationships in our semantic models, we also want to make sure that we're clearly labeling which ones are active and inactive. Copilot can visualize all the relationships in our model, so it'll see the active ones as well as it'll see the inactive ones as well. So being able to define those and labels clearly will help Copilot guide your DAX as well. It'll help guide the DAX and help guide the understanding of the overall model. Next will be well-structured DAX. So as we're developing our semantic models, as we're creating calculated columns, we're creating measures, we want to make sure we're using DAX that's well-structured and easy to understand. A good rule of thumb is that if I were to hand the semantic model off to a new developer, a junior developer, they just joined the organization, I would expect them to see this DAX and have a good understanding just by looking at it, what that DAX is doing. So how can we achieve that? Generally, we'll want to leverage standardized logic. So we want to use consistent and easily explainable calculations. Well, we want to try to avoid those complex DAX equations and use those built-in functions to make sure that the DAX is easy to understand. Next, we want to make sure we're choosing clear and purposeful names. So we want to make sure we're naming our measures, our calculated columns intuitively, making sure that they are understood and easy to interpret just by natural human language. So a good example here that's actually listed here is there's often a lot of KPIs or acronyms we use across the industry. For example, if we think about net promoter score, that's a very common metric. A lot of organizations will abbreviate that and use the acronym NPS for net promoter score. While many of us in the industry might know that NPS stands for net promoter score, Copilot might think that may mean a different acronym entirely. And Copilot might struggle with what does NPS mean. So making sure you're using clear and purposeful names can really help Copilot get a better understanding of your data model, your semantic model, and just your overall organizational structure as well. And as we're leveraging DAX across our semantic models, we also want to make sure we're predefining key metrics and key KPIs. So any KPI that's well often asked or requested from an IT team or data professional, we want to make sure those are included in our semantic models. Let's, for example, say a very common metric is cost of goods sold. We'll want to include that measure or calculated column within our model directly. That way that whenever a user says, hey, Copilot, what's the cost of goods sold for this quarter, for example, Copilot won't have to assume and make up that calculation as that calculation will be already natively built into the semantic model. So as a key good note to take away from this, high quality measures and calculated columns give Copilot the best starting point for accurate and useful results. Since Copilot is able to see your whole semantic model and see all the metadata that lives on the semantic model as well, it'll be able to read into your DAX and your measures and your descriptions, and it'll be able to actually make good inferences and re-leverage those DAX you've created to provide key and clear insights for your users. And next, which I highlighted a little bit, is we want to make sure we're using descriptions. We want to communicate intent with metadata. So as you're going through your semantic model, you're creating DAX columns, measures, you have some fields. We want to make sure we're filling out this properties pane. On the right, I have a small image of what that properties pane looks like. And I'll admit, I'm quite guilty of this myself. I'm not always filling out the properties pane. But if I wanted to optimize this for Copilot and AI, I want to make sure I'm filling out this properties pane as this is the metadata that Copilot can look into to get a better understanding of what your data looks like. So we want to add clear and concise descriptions to every table, column, and measure. And as we're adding descriptions, we want to focus on what that field is and how it should be used. So we can say this field, for example, like this profit field, we can say this is calculates the total profit over, it takes the cost of goods sold, it takes the revenue, and it calculates the profit. So giving some insight about it, when it should be used, and how that formula works as well. And if we have calculation groups, we want to be using that group's columns description field. That way we can apply that description to the calculation group as a whole. And as a keynote, as we're going through descriptions, adding metadata to the properties pane, a good thing to keep in mind is Copilot actually only looks into the first 200 characters of that description. So we want to make sure we're leading with the most important information. And a good takeaway here is that that's well-written metadata is one of the most effective ways to guide Copilot's behavior. When Copilot looks into this, it really allows it to get a really good understanding of your data and how to leverage it once users are querying your data with Copilot. And the next best practice is going to be meaningful hierarchies. Copilot can be really, really great at navigating layered questions, such as how does an item breakout look like? What are my costs? What are my sales by the item breakout? However, for us to succeed at this and really excel, we want to make sure we're building logical hierarchies within our tables. So, for example, let's say we have a dimension, an item dimension. We're going to want to make sure we're building that logical hierarchy within the dimension itself. So let's say we have an item is our lowest grain. An item can fall into a category, and a category can fall into multiple product lines, for example. Having this hierarchy built out within your model will help Copilot understand your overall business structure and allow it to produce more clear insights where you can actually drill deeper and enhance Copilot's understanding. So now when I ask, what were my cost of goods sold for the last quarter? It can showcase it by the item, and then it could actually let us drill up or down into category or product line respectively. And the structured hierarchy is going to help Copilot drill deeper and make sure that it can actually provide those insights to us that we really are trying to get to, and also provide just deeper level data of what the data looks like. Next best practice we should be following is going to be data value standardization. So now that we've actually walked through a little bit of the process, we've cleaned up our schema. We're using a star schema, we're using good modeling, we're using good relationships, and we're also adding metadata and describing our fields. That may be all great for Copilot. Copilot's going to have a really good understanding, but we also got to make sure our data itself is clean and consistent. As we're going through our data, we want to make sure we're standardizing columns effectively to make sure that they're clear and consistent. If we go ahead and look at that example on the right, so on the right, we have two columns. We have one that's called priority and one that's standardized priority. If we look at that priority column, and this is a very common thing across a lot of organizations, we can see is that sometimes we might have survey data, for example, and in that priority column, we can see that, for example, the first line says hi, it's spelled H-I-G-H. The second one is hi, H-I, and the next one's going to be just a number one for high priority. All these can be defined as high priority. However, when Copilot's analyzing this, it might not infer that all three of those priorities mean high priority. So as we're transforming the data, as we're modeling the data, and as we're cleaning the data during the ETL process, we also want to make sure we're standardizing those data. So if we look at that column on the right, the standardized priority, we're changing all of those high priority items into one standardized field for high, which is HIGH in this case. So just having this clean, consistent values can help Copilot improve filtering. So as you're filtering your data, it can help it aggregate and summarize your data better as well, and also help its natural language understanding as it's going through your data model as well. And next, we want to make sure we're defining and labeling our key performance indicators. So like I mentioned earlier, Copilot's going to be most effective when you have predefined metrics and KPIs in your model, making sure you're identifying KPIs that users are going to ask frequently and making sure those are available in the model. In addition to making sure those are available in the model, you also want to make sure they're well documented. So filling out a description for critical KPIs and making sure that Copilot has the business context it needs to make sure it can leverage that DAX and those KPIs effectively. So as you're writing DAX for those KPIs, you want to make sure they're well structured, well defined, and well labeled so that Copilot can answer those real business questions more accurately and efficiently without having to guess and taking out the guesswork, making sure that it's not making up its own calculations and leveraging the common calculations that have been standardized, defined, and governed by your organization. Next is going to be row level security. With AI, with Copilot, these tools are extremely awesome. They're really cool and they provide a lot of cool features for us to actually leverage and enhance our workflows. But at the end of the day, security remains essential and it's going to be a key part of leveraging Copilot. With Copilot, users can query and ask Copilot questions about the data using natural language. And some users might have different intents and might try to actually ask questions that they shouldn't have access to. They might try to get information from the backend semantic model and dig deeper. With Copilot, Copilot has access to the whole semantic model. So even though, let's say, a user is interacting a report and that data is not natively visual, that data is not native in the visual, if that data is available in the semantic model, users might try to backdoor that semantic model and get the information out of it without actually having to go through the report itself. So we want to make sure we're using row level security to make sure we're protecting that sensitive data and enforcing those boundaries directly in the semantic model. So this is going to make sure we support the governance in our overall organizational structure, and it's going to prevent data leakage and accidental exposure. So if we look at the right in this example right here, we have a few different sales transactions. We have a couple sales IDs, a couple sales reps. In this case, let's assume we may want to make sure that our sales reps can only see their particular sales transactions. So in this case, let's say I'm sales rep 25. I notice that I can actually see sales rep 3 on line 2, which is not the organization's intent. This is not secure. And we want to make sure that we're restricting this so that sales rep 25 can only see their particular transaction. So once we enhance and apply row of security, that row becomes hidden and only sales rep 25 can see their data. They won't be able to see the other data. And we should be enforcing these kind of rules and structure and security across our organization and across our data stack. So row level security ensures that Copilot is going to stay helpful and also going to make sure it stays within its boundaries without compromising that data security. So now that we've covered some of the best practices, what can we do today to really just get our hands on the model and start optimizing our models right away? Fortunately, Microsoft Fabric offers a few built-in native tools that actually allow you to look into your model a little deeper, optimize your models, and prepare them for AI. So one of these cool tools that I like to leverage across all my models is going to be the best practice analyzer. This is an out-of-the-box Fabric notebook, and it's built to connect to the semantic model and will analyze the semantic model, then compare it to a set of 60 plus rules that have been created by Microsoft Fabric experts and employees, and compares your model against them and offers tips to improve your design and your performance of your models so that you can optimize it not only for performance but for AI as well. And the nice thing about this is this best practice analyzer is actually using a library called the Semantic Links Labs, which allows you to use your notebooks and connect it natively to your semantic model. So it's a really cool tool that we'll look at later that can really dive deep into your model and show you where are the faults in your model, where can you optimize it, and where can you help Copilot understand the model a little better. Another cool tool, and this is a more recent one, is going to be the AI data schemas. Recently, Microsoft Fabric introduced a new feature called Prep Data for AI, which allows you to modify and help Copilot understand your data model a little better. One of these features is the AI data schemas. And AI data schemas help Copilot prioritize the most relevant fields in your model so that when users are asking questions or when you're working with the semantic model, Copilot will know which fields to prioritize and deprioritize. So when you're defining AI data schemas in your semantic models, what you can do is that you can actually look at all the tables in your semantic models and select which fields to prioritize. You can define and focus on a subset of your semantic model so that when Copilot is interacting with your semantic model, it'll focus solely on those fields. It won't ignore the other fields entirely. Those other fields are still visible. But let's say unless a user explicitly asks for those deprioritized fields, Copilot's not going to put a heavy emphasis on it. And this is going to really reduce ambiguity and narrow the scope of analysis. So this is going to be really useful for, let's say, you have fields that might be named similarly to that example we mentioned before, where you might have multiple tables, they might have multiple fields called amount. This can really reduce the ambiguity in there and make sure that Copilot is going to focus on the one that really matters to your organization. It's going to help Copilot interpret the queries more accurately, efficiently, as well as confidently. And providing this AI data schema, defining this AI data schema as well, is going to help align Copilot's responses with the business organization's priorities, as well as provide a smoother user experience. And next, we want to talk about verified answers. This is another really cool tool built into Microsoft Fabric directly. This is also part of that Prep for Data AI features that has been recently released. And it's actually going to allow you to select visuals within reports and predefine those as verified answers. So in this example here, let's say we pick a visual. We can add some queries and prompts that a user may ask, and then or whenever that user or stakeholder asks that question, it's going to return that visual and say, hey, this has been human verified. Someone has verified this as an answer to the question you're asking. So you can set up phrases that will as triggers that can trigger certain visuals to make sure that your users are getting consistent and accurate results that are common to the business and are trusted and verified. And the nice thing about this is that you're going to set it up in your semantic model and in your reports. However, if you have multiple reports sharing the same semantic model, it's going to be reusable across the semantic model as well. So let's say you're on one report, a user asks a question, and it detects that it's a verified answer for a visual in another report. It's going to go ahead and repoint that user to another report and say, hey, this question you asked has been verified by the organization, and you can find the answer in the visual on this other report here. And lastly, then the last cool tool I want to talk about is AI instructions. This is personally one of my favorite ones. This allows you to actually embed guidance directly into the semantic model. So this is also part of the Prep for Data AI features. And when you're doing this, when you're setting this up, you're going to see a free text box similar to on the right, where you can actually use natural language, type in the rules, type in the logic for your organization, and pretty much handpick and define key rules for Copilot when it's interacting with users and developers. So using this, really the opportunities are endless. You can use natural language to define key business terms, for example, preferred analysis methods. You can ask it to highlight or focus on certain metrics. You can ask it to ignore certain metrics, for example. And it's really going to help Copilot interpret or questions and make sure that the answers are in line with your organization's intents as well. So these are one of the really cool features that I like personally and I personally use as well when I use my semantic models. Awesome. And with that, that pretty much covers all the tools that Microsoft Fabric has built in to really optimize your models for Copilot and AI. Now I'm going to go ahead and switch over to demo so we can actually look at some of these tools in action and how you can actually leverage them today in your workflows. So give me one short moment as I'm going to go ahead and switch my screen over. Awesome. So now I'm going to be in Power BI service. The first tool I want to highlight is going to be that best practice analyzer. That best practice analyzer is going to be that built-in tool in Fabric that's actually going to let us look into our model and see where we might have performance issues or gaps within our model. So to access this tool, first I'm going to go ahead and pick one of my semantic models. For example, let's click the sales model here. I'm going to go ahead and click that drop down. And I'm going to go ahead and click on Open Semantic Model. Awesome. And then once my semantic model is open, on the top right in this ribbon, we're going to see a section called Model Health. In this, you'll see Best Practice Analyzer, Memory Analyzer, and Community Notebooks. The one we're focusing on today is Best Practice Analyzer, which is going to dive deep into our model. However, there are other tools to check your model health as well, which I wanted to highlight, such as the Memory Analyzer, which is actually going to dig into your model and look at the metadata and the stored structures to see, hey, where's my model taking up too much memory? Where can I optimize the model? As well as community notebooks, which will actually take you to the Fabric community, where you can actually re-leverage notebooks that have been built by community or contribute your own notebooks that can help users improve their model health. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump into this best practice analyzer. To start it up, all I have to do is just click on it right here. and it's going to go ahead and automatically create that notebook. So let's say I'm new to coding. Let's say I'm not familiar with Python. This is a really cool tool as well. You don't need to be a pro coder to actually get into this, as it's just going to get automatically coded and built out for you. So after a few seconds, the best practice analyzer builds out. There's some notes here, some documentation as well. And if we scroll through the code, you're going to see all that Python code is generated automatically. And it's automatically defining our data sets, our workspaces. So everything's automatically connected. Now all I have to do is hit run all on this top left. And it will give us about a minute for it to kick in and start analyzing our model. And usually this will take about roughly 30 seconds to a minute. In this case, it was a little quicker, but after this is finished running, we can actually scroll down to output. And right away, you'll see a few different key insights it's giving us into our model. So first, it looks into the DAX expressions. And right away, it says, here's the rule you're violating. My column references are not fully qualified, which might make the DAX a little harder to understand and interpret for Copilot, as well as be less performant. So going through these, I can scroll through them. Another one's calling out is that I should be using the divide function instead of just using the slash to divide. In addition to going through this, it's also going to call out the severity of the issues. So it's going to call out how high of a level of security is it, or more of just a warning. Next, I'll have formatting. This is also a really good one for making sure you're optimized for Copilot and AI in general. Looking through this formatting pane is going to help Copilot really understand what formatting you have in your model. And here's it's identifying some key errors we might have in our model. For example, it's saying do not summarize numeric columns. This can be really good as well, just to make sure that if I look at this field, this one, for example, says calendar month number. Maybe this is a numeric field that we don't want to summarize just because that calendar month number shouldn't be summarized. It's more of a descriptor for our date table. So going through this, we can see the potential errors we have in our model and where the potential areas that Copilot might struggle when working with our model. And lastly, which we won't touch on too much, is going to be maintenance as well as performance. These are going to be more focused around optimizing your model for performance and efficiency, and less around Copilot. However, if you're already using this best practice analyzer tool, I'd recommend going through this as well. Just take a look at what areas you can really optimize your model. Awesome. And that was the best practice analyzer. Now I'm going to go ahead and switch gears. We're going to go into Power BI Desktop a bit and actually look into that PEP data for AI features we were talking about earlier. So give me one moment as I switch screens again. Awesome. And now we're in Power BI. Let me know if you can see the screen or if you can't see the screen.
Yeah, I can see the screen now. Perfect.
Perfect. Thank you, Sean. So now we're in Power BI. We're in one of our reports and semantic models. So in this case, this is going to be a report and a semantic model in one. And just looking briefly, let's assume we're a new developer. We're going into this model view. We have a star schema. That's great. So this is an efficient model. But if we look at the fields, maybe the fields might be hard to understand. I see there's a lot of the fields might be not well named. In this case, I might be unsure of what a WWI invoice ID is. And I see there's a few different fields for our totals. There's total excluding tax, total including tax, which might be confusing for even me as a new developer to interpret, and even more so confusing for, let's say, Copilot to interpret, especially when it's asking questions about totals and how your organization is doing revenue wise. So let's prepare our model for AI so we can actually help Copilot navigate these situations. So if I go back to my ribbon on top in the home ribbon, on the top right, you'll see this button that says prep data for AI. So I'll go ahead and click on this button and we'll give it a short moment to load. Awesome. Now that the pop-up is now visible, first thing I want to take a look at is going to be simplify the data schema. So when I click on this, it's going to go ahead and show my whole semantic model. And now I'm going to have the opportunity to actually hand select and pick which fields I want to prioritize and deprioritize. By default, all the fields here are going to be selected and our whole model is going to be selected as well. So right now everything's prioritized, but let's actually refine this and remove some fields that maybe we don't want to hone in on too much. So if I go ahead and open my fact table, that fact sales, earlier I called out that there's multiple totals in our model. In this case, there's two. There's total excluding tax and total including tax. If I had a user that's asked, let's say, what's the total revenue for the year, Copilot might struggle and it might randomly guess on which one of these to pull. In my case, for my organization, let's assume I always want to use the total including tax. In this case, I'm going to actually deselect total excluding tax and leave this out of our AI schema. So I'm refining this a little bit and refining which fields to deprioritize and prioritize. As a note, as we're prioritizing and deprioritizing fields in our AI data schemas, this does not remove them from the model entirely. These are still going to be in the model. And let's say a user asks explicitly, what's the total excluding tax? This field is still going to be accessible by Copilot and still going to be present in the model. However, by default, it's going to default to this AI data schema we've predefined. I'm going to hit apply and give it a moment as it applies. Awesome. Now that's applied. Let's actually look at AI instructions. So AI instructions is going to be that free text box I mentioned earlier. This is where we're going to be able to actually put in and ask Copilot explicit instructions, allowing it to be navigated by you as a user and as a developer. And you'll be able to provide context as well as specific instructions on how Copilot should act and operate with your data. So in this case, they actually provide a few recommendations, such as for revenue-related questions, use a sales performance table, just so that it can guide you as a user on what instructions you can really ask here. As a note, you do have a 10,000 character limit, which is quite large. So feel free to put any instructions here that may be
Um,
applicable to your
People are saying
organization.
that your screen might be stuck. Um,
Oh, I
if you want to try it
apologize.
again,
Yeah, thank you for calling that out.
no worries. They just say we don't see the pop-ups. We only do see the Power BI desktop report. That's what they're saying.
Let's go ahead and share the whole screen for this case.
Yeah, I'd say if
And
you
let me
share
know
the
if you can
full
see that
screen.
now.
Yeah, I can see it now. Yeah,
Awesome, perfect. So I'm actually, apologies for that. Let's actually
no
backtrack a
worries
bit
up.
to that data schema. So that data schema I was talking about earlier, it is by default going to select your whole model, but within here, we can go ahead and deselect items to deprioritize them. In the case you mentioned earlier, we do have those two totals. We have the total excluding tax as well as the total including tax. For my user queries, my user prompts, I really want to just hone in on that total including tax. So I'm going to deselect this, which is going to deprioritize it from the model. And just to highlight again, it's not actually removing the field from my model. The field is still present in my model. And when users ask about that field explicitly, Copilot will still be able to access that field and provide insights about that field as well. So I'm going to go ahead and apply. And next is going to be the AI instructions, which we were talking about earlier. This is going to be that free text box. We can pretty much put any instructions we want to really guide Copilot and navigate it as it's answering user queries and developing. In this case, in my case, let's assume that whenever a user asks something revenue related, I want to make sure the output's always grouped by customer. I can add instructions such as for revenue related questions, always group the output by customer. And that's going to be one instruction I give it. When you're going through this, you can feel free to add a lot more instructions. Once again, you do have that 10,000 character limit. So you have plenty of room to give Copilot some instructions and really navigate it through your AI data. I'm going to go ahead and apply this instruction. And we'll just keep this in mind for later when we test this. We'll want to make sure that it's following this instruction. And we'll go ahead and hit close. So the last one we talked about, but we haven't touched on yet, is going to be those verified answers. The verified answer is going to act a little differently as you don't actually set it up natively in this prep data for AI tab. You're actually going to start from a visual you want to verify. So for this case, let's actually focus on this visual here. This one right here I'm highlighting, it says total tax over time. Let's go ahead and click on more options. And let's say I want to set this up as a verified answer. I'm going to go ahead and click on this, and that prep for data for AI feature is going to pop up again, except now it's going to showcase the visualization. So on the right, I have that visualization, and now I'm actually able to enter phrases that will connect to those verified answers. So here I can add phrases, keywords, or trigger words that will, whenever a user asks them, it will go ahead and navigate to this answer and say, hey, this has been verified and set up by an actual human and a user. So Copilot's actually offering a few suggestions here based on what the visual is saying. So I'm actually going to input these Copilot suggestions, such as what is the total tax amount over time? How does the tax amount change each period? As well as which period had the highest tax amount. A note on how this works is that Copilot does a few things when it tries to match a query with the verified answer. It does exact matches. So it might look for this phrase entirely exactly like what is a total tax amount over time? It also does partial matches for trigger words. So for example, if I wanted to do a more partial match, I can add something such as tax amount over time. So not a full blown on question, but tax amount over time. And now this will actually be treated as a trigger word. So when a user asks something related to tax amount over time, this visual will go ahead and pop up and come up as a verified answer. So now I'll go ahead and apply that to my model. And now that my model has been prepared for AI, let's actually go ahead and switch back into Power BI service and see how this looks like from an end user perspective. So give me one moment as I'm going to switch my screen back into Power BI service. So now we're back into Power BI service. We're right back where we left off in our best practice analyzer. Let's actually navigate back to that workspace and go to that report that we have prepared for AI. So we recall, we set up a few things in here. We set up a verified answer. We set up some AI instructions to make sure that whenever we ask revenue related questions, it's always going to group by customer. And we also wanted to make sure it focuses on total including tax and not total excluding tax. So let's go ahead and test this out and see what it looks like from an end user perspective. I'm now an end user. I'm going to go ahead and open up my Copilot window. I want to interact with the data a bit, understand it a little deeper. What if I ask a question such as, what was the total revenue? Fairly simple question, but we'll see how Copilot reacts to it. I'm asking a simple question to really keep it open-ended and really challenge Copilot and see what inferences is Copilot going to make with such an open-ended question. So if we recall, we did a few things. In our AI data schema, we mentioned to focus on total including tax. We excluded that total excluding tax from our data schema and deprioritized it. So we actually look at here and this value, it's actually focusing on total including tax only. So this is the sum of total including tax, and it didn't even factor in that total excluding tax at all. Another thing we did is that it actually summed it by customer. So it listened to our AI data instructions where it says always group revenue related questions by customer, and it grouped it by customer. And this is a really interesting one is because to really challenge Copilot and test Copilot, I actually only put one customer into this data set. So there's only one customer here, which is that Wingtip Toys. However, despite only having one customer, Copilot still followed the instructions and actually grouped it by the customer. So it might look like a funny visual, but in this case, Copilot's actually listening to our instructions. Next, let's go actually test out our verified answer. So we set a verified answer on this total tax amount over time. So let's say a user asks, what was a tax over time? We'll give it a few seconds. It's checking the underlying data. And right away it says, your question matched a verified answer. So it matched, how does the tax amount change over different periods? In this case, I didn't ask the question specifically, but it found a keyword search. It found a trigger for search using the tax over time, and it was able to match my query with the verified answer for this visual. And it actually showcases this visual here and says this has been verified by a human and has been a verified answer by the organization itself. So we've tested all three features, and now we know that, hey, the preparations we did for the data and preparations we did for AI are actually working. Copilot's actually leveraging all these rules we've set up for it. And using these tools, you can actually deliver more clear, actionable insights to your users and making sure that Copilot's more consistent as it's being used. And with that, that pretty much wraps up my demo. I'll go ahead and switch back over to our deck. Awesome. So we've gone into our demo. Before I go into the questions and answers, just want to leave this QR code up. If you want to connect with me, you feel free to connect with me as well. But other than that, I'll leave the floor open to any questions and answers you might have. Thank you all for attending. It was great having you here and hope you learned something new as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Samson. So I have a question there. How do you align data ownership and stewardship with semantic model governance so that Copilot doesn't end up servicing ungoverned or shadow metrics?
That's a really great question. And there's not really a right answer to this always. I think every organization handles it a little differently. But I think having a good data governance structure is always going to be key. So making sure that you're setting up a data governance structure from who are data owners, who are data stewards that are actually owning each piece of, let's say, different functional areas. So common setup is that you might have one data owner or data steward per functional area that's actually going to define and refine and validate certain KPIs or business elements. And
Perfect.
leveraging those and standardizing that with your IT teams can really help drive those definitions and make sure everyone's aligned.
Perfect. I don't think there's any more questions. So I think that's the end of today's webinar. You can find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/research center. On the behalf of the ESPC community, we'd like to send a big thank to you again, Samson, for taking time out today to carry this webinar. Really appreciate it. So thanks again for all of you for joining us today, and I hope you join us again soon. Take care.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.